Welcome to video 5 of chapter 6, where we will look at nutrition. We just have a few slides in this video, and we'll start with breastfeeding. Um, you know, most people get that breastfeeding offers good nutrition and that it is a way for the mother to pass immunities onto the child. But most people don't realize all of the benefits associated with breastfeeding for both the mother and the infant. So we have this nice chart here from page 213, and I'm just going to run through these lists real quick here because it's such extensive benefits, and everything colored in white, as you can see, it's labeled conclusive evidence. These are things that we know through research and experimentation that are definitely benefits. So benefits for mother include things like lower risk of type 2 diabetes, lower risk of high cholesterol, uh, lower risk of ovarian cancer and certain types of breast cancer, lower risk of cardiovascular disease, the uterus returning to pre-pregnancy shape quicker, lower blood pressure and less reactive to stress, reduced maternal obesity in later life. I mean, a very extensive list of benefits for the mother, and this is for the mother breastfeeding. For the infant, fewer respiratory illnesses, ear infections, and gastrointestinal diseases, lower risk of allergies, asthma, eczema, reduced risk of SIDS, lower risk of childhood obesity, reduced adolescent and adult obesity, lower risk of diarrhea, less vomiting, lower risk of childhood leukemia, lower risk of type 2 diabetes. I mean, so many of these are lifelong benefits for both the mother and the child. It's not just benefits at the time or for a year or two. I mean, these are lifelong benefits that are being passed on and gained by both the mother and child due to breastfeeding. So this is why it's so important that breastfeeding is always encouraged um, for mothers with newborns. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months following birth. So only breastfeeding for the first 6 months. It gives the infant everything they need. And then they recommend that other foods are gradually introduced, and they supplement the breastfeeding between 6 months and 1 year, meaning you don't stop breastfeeding. If you want an ideal situation and to give your child the best start at life, you should try to make it at least to 1 year. 6 months does a lot for a child, and due to circumstances, sometimes mothers have to discontinue breastfeeding. Um, but if you can go the whole year, you start introducing other foods along with the breastfeeding between 6 months and 1 year. After 1 year, what they recommend is that breastfeeding continue as long as the mother and child both want to continue it. And there is no unhealthy limit to, that breastfeeding needs to stop. It never becomes bad. So, I know some people um, get upset when they see, like a young child that might be standing and breastfeeding, and it's like, well, if they can walk, they don't need to breastfeed anymore. I mean, this is just kind of um, a kind of a prejudicial kind of attitude among certain people, but it still benefits. It benefits a 2-year-old. It can benefit a 3-year-old even. I mean, like, and it doesn't matter if you think it's gross or something. But I mean, if both the child and the mother are comfortable doing it. I mean, if the child wants to stop, then you should stop. But if it's not a problem for the mother or the child, then it is no issue in continuing it. And in particular for poorer families and or families growing up in third world countries, it is it is often continued for long, for years, because it is a free source of nutritious food for the child, and it is still nutritious and beneficial at any point. Anyways, minimum 6 months is the recommendation. Try for a year. And once again, the first 6 months only breastfeeding. Okay. And I know, once again, I understand why some mothers don't, and that it's impossible, and that they have to work, and this and that, and other things get in the way. And there are certain cases, if the mother has certain diseases, she can't breastfeed and things like that. But if you can, if it's available, it is the best start for a child's life to breastfeed them for at least the first year. Okay, let's go on. Healthy eating, good nutrition is associated with positive development in many areas. It's extremely important. There are problems associated with malnutrition. Malnutrition includes both what's called overnutrition, which is too many nutrients, too much food, and as well as undernutrition. So malnutrition just covers both over and undernutrition. I'm not going to talk more about overnutrition, but undernutrition is a deficiency of calories or of one or more essential nutrients. It can affect brain development, physical health and growth as well. So brain development as well as physical health and growth. The younger the child, the greater the effect. And that should not be surprising. We know how much development is happening early in life, both mentally and physically. I mean, the brain is rapidly developing in the first 3 to 5 years. The body is rapidly developing, especially in the first 2 years of life. And so if the undernutrition happens during those early years, there is a greater effect than if it happens later in childhood. When there are effects, they are permanent and irreversible. There's no catching up later. Like, well, yeah, they were really hungry for the first year, but we have food, so they'll be okay. Well, no, if you went the first year of life and the baby was hungry, I mean, there's no catching up. The damage is done. Okay, this is not just what you might think of as a third world country in Africa kind of problem with starving kids. And I mean, this is a very serious problem in the U.S. Even though we are a rich country, we have young children that are facing undernutrition and being damaged due to being undernourished. And the thing is, like I said, we're a rich country. If we were to just reduce our military expenditure, let's say, for instance, we could make sure that every child had enough food to eat. Or if we had all the millionaires and billionaires devote a small percentage of their wealth, we could make sure that every child had enough food to eat. And I know we are an individualistic country, and so the attitude is, well, if it's their child, they're responsible for it, and then maybe they shouldn't have had a child if they couldn't afford to feed it. And I mean, I'm not okay with that idea myself, maybe because I come from Canada or something, but it's the way I always look at it is it's certainly, it's certainly not the child's fault. As much as you might want to blame the parents or say they made bad decisions or shouldn't have had a child, it is not, none of this is the responsibility of the child. So, I mean, I think we need to, think of it in a little bit of a different way at times and understand that it's the children I'm concerned about. It's not their parents. And I believe we should have more programs in place. And I know there are a lot now, but more programs in place to try to make sure that every child has enough to eat, since we can certainly afford it. Okay, a third issue is food insecurity, which is also a serious issue in the States. Some of you may have experienced it before. There's many families in Rochester that face it, as well as other, throughout the States, other places. Food insecurity is when food is often scarce or unavailable. And this causes people to overeat when they do have access to food. And so they kind of set up a feast and famine pattern. Sometimes they're without food for stretches, or have very limited food. And then there might be, times during the month or during the year where there's more money and more food available, and then they overeat and kind of try to make up for it. And so they feast and they have famine. Um, you see this pattern when, like maybe there's a monthly check that comes into the home, and so they have food for part of the month, and then as the money runs out, there's not very much food at the end of the month. Then the check comes in, and they have food again, and then no food at the end of the month. So this is what sets up the feast and famine pattern. And when a child goes through that kind of pattern, it usually leads to actually weight gain over time. So even though there's food insecurity, they may end up having a problem with obesity because of the gorging and the feasting that goes on whenever food is available. They've been hungry for a while, they want to eat as much as they can. And this is a natural human instinct, is when you go without food for a while, you learn to gorge and to overeat when there is food. And this has always been a human pattern. There was times in our evolutionary past where, you know, every now and then there would be a kill. Let's say you're a tribe, and 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 so everyone would feast for a while, and then they may go without, killing an animal or having fresh food for long periods. And so it is part of our kind of built into our human genetics to feast if you've gone without food. Okay, finally we have obesity and overweight. Obviously, very serious issues in the U.S. I'm not going to get too much into it, but obesity is all defined as being it is defined as being 20% or more over an individual's ideal weight. Once again, obviously a very serious issue in the United States, as well as many other countries as well. And finally, eating disorders. I want to do these quick. These are not really childhood problems, but they are certainly adolescent problems. I want you to just at least know what they are in case you don't. Anorexia nervosa. This is a pattern of starvation that an individual goes through in relentless pursuit of thinness. And it is a psychological disorder, because it's not just excessive dieting. There's no stopping point with somebody with anorexia. So it's not like when I get down to this weight, I'll stop. When they get down to that weight, they continue. This is why it can very easily lead to death, and does so in many cases if it's not treated, because they actually end up starving themselves to death. There's a lot more I could say about it, but I just want you to know the basics. Bulimia nervosa. This is when an individual goes through a pattern of binging and purging. So the binging is they will binge on food and overeat, and then they will do something to try to get rid of the excessive calories that they consumed through purging. Purging can take many forms. The most common one that people know of is vomiting. That some people will eat a big meal and then go vomit. It could involve laxatives that, in order to purge, but purging can take other forms as well. It could be excessive exercise. That could be a form of purging. So you overeat and then you hit the gym for hours. It could be actually starving for a little while. So some people, their purge is to go without food for some days. They eat huge, so it's kind of like the feast and famine pattern. They eat a huge amount, and then they starve themselves for a couple of days to try to make up for it. So anyways, purging does take different forms. And that will conclude chapter 6.